Come on out, Zoltan. Okay. Oh, hi, how's it going? Welcome back to Collected Creations. In this video, I want to talk about something that... Now, oh god, I don't even know if I have enough experience to talk about it, but I think it's an interesting thing to discuss because a lot of people don't really talk about it. I want to talk about HDR and SDR, high dynamic range and standard dynamic range. This isn't going to be a huge deep dive onto the technical aspects of both. It's more or less an aspect of when you get a 4K film, for example, Kino Cult's release of Zoltan Hound of Dracula, which I did do a Blu-ray review of, and Eureka Masters of Cinema's release for Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, also the 4K UHD. Yeah, 4K. So, these two releases don't come with high dynamic range. There's no HDR, HDR10, Dolby Vision. There's no extra encoding to pump up like colors or black levels or anything like that, because the technical bare bones necessities of, like, if I want to speak in English kind of quotations of what is HDR, is it basically allows for deeper colors, deeper blacks, you know, maybe brighter colors and deeper blacks. Deeper blacks are always the ones that I'm more interested in over brighter colors, unless, I don't know, because usually you want darker images, and if the darker, not darker images, the dark points of images to not be crushed, and HDR gives it that extra kick. There's a lot of bonuses to HDR grading and whatever, and, you know, there's, in each film circle, there's always people who prefer it and those who don't. In this case, I personally don't mind it. I like it if it's applied well to a film. You know, if my Blu-ray player or the TV or whatever has the ability to turn off HDR as well, then I'll do that too. Like, there's a reason why most HDR graded films come with the extra bonus of you can have a swap between HDR or HDR10 or HDR10 Plus or Dolby Vision. I don't have HDR10 Plus, but I do have a couple HDR10 Plus releases. There aren't many, but they exist. Alien is one of them. It's crazy. So there are those 4K releases that don't come with HDR. The standard dynamic range ones, the ones I just mentioned before. There's a lot of them, a surprising amount of them that I actually have, but I can never remember which ones actually have standard dynamic range or not. Like, I used to be disappointed when they didn't have Dolby Vision. I was like, what the fuck? It's just HDR or HDR10 Plus or whatever. And it's like, no, well, actually, it's still, you know, it's still got high dynamic range. So some of these films still come with high dynamic range, some don't. God, it's so annoying to say high dynamic range consistently. I guess the question can come down to, realistically, after having watched a couple films that do come with HDR, most of which were either upgrades from previous releases I already had, or were just alternatives. And the constant argument I have to keep in mind is it worth having HDR over SDR? And realistically, I would say yes, because if the company who's producing the Blu-ray, you know, who's doing the transfer, can put in the extra work, you know, to uptick in detail a film, I think it's worthwhile. If you don't need to have it, you don't need to have it. But I think on a 4K UHD disc, a disc that is 66 to 100 gigabytes and has the space for it, you should put it on. Encode it as you would. But of course, you know, some companies won't do that. Say, mostly I'd say for budgeting reasons. If you get, say, Zoltan Hound of Dracula, the Kino Lorber release, I had only gotten the 4K UHD because I wanted to get it, and it so happened that the 4K was cheaper than the Blu-ray. And the Blu-ray was still a 4K scan on a Blu-ray disc, came with all the same special features, so did the 4K UHD, but the UHD also comes with the Blu-ray. So at least with the Kino you have that benefit, and I was able to do a comparison in my video review, jumping between the two and noting where I think the benefits work. If it had a HDR grading, it would be much more noticeable what those benefits were, but for the most part, because it's a larger size on a disc and you get more natural space for the film to kind of flourish and to like max out the bit rate and whatever, all the technical stuff to like kick the crap out of it to make it as like strong and, you know, crystal clear as possible, whatever kind of terminology you want to use, because not everybody knows what the hell all these minor little details are. What is a bit rate? That's just technical specs. It's all metadata and bullshit. But at the same time, it's still relevant and important to those who care. And so, obviously, I have to kind of note down those kind of key words. Obviously, if I had Zoltan and it came with HDR, if I compared that to a non-HDR version, a SDR version, I would notice a difference, you know? Obviously, that kind of still beckons the question of, is it still worth buying a 4K of a film, especially if it's already, say if it's an upgrade from a pre-existing 4K restoration on a Blu-ray, and the disc doesn't come with HDR, say again like Dr. Caligari and whatever, and that was a, you know, the limited edition version. I already had the standard release. I didn't know it didn't come with HDR until I watched it recently, and I was like thinking, there's no icon has popped up in the top of, you know, the corner of my screen to say HDR or, you know, Dolby Vision or anything, and I looked at it and it didn't have any details because it doesn't have HDR. And now it is a film that is, you know, it's a silent film from the 20s, it is color tinted, but you can still apply a HDR grade to it, but maybe they just looked at it and were like, I don't know if they experimented with it and realized this doesn't look good with HDR grading, or just were like, we don't need this, or maybe it was just one of those, hey, this is a catalog item we have, we want to keep maybe the license, and just reprint it with all the limited edition stuff, and, you know, put it on a 4K disc. It's already a 4K scan, you get more room, you get more, you know, larger bitrate, all the, you know, max it out to hell, and you get it all on one disc. But at the same time, if you had the original Blu-ray, which has the 4K scan, is there much of a difference? And of course, that becomes a question more or less, is Blu-ray and 4K ultimately different? And I mean, the answer is still yes, but it can always be a minute difference. Like jumping back and forth between Zoltan on Blu-ray and 4K, there were minute differences. When you froze the frame, it didn't, you know, pause it and whatever, and you flick back and forth between, because I have two players on top of each other that have a little switch box, which so I can click it and I'll switch the screen over and whatever, which is great. Makes it easier if I need to use like the Region 8 player or whatever. And so comparing it back and forth with still images, it's not as obvious, but you have it in motion in contrast, and there are noticeable upticks here and there. You know, there's clearly, like, I don't know, less fuzz around the characters in the 4K than there is in the Blu-ray. There's just general upticks in detail. But it comes down to that question of, if you really want the 4K and it doesn't come with HDR, and there's already a Blu-ray that exists with a 4K scan, I always have the mentality of, and it's probably a good mentality in general, of just buy the cheaper version, realistically. Like, if it's a film that really benefits from a 4K UHD that you will notice, like, standing across the room from it, then yeah, great. But if you have to look up close, like I did for Zoltan, it won't matter. Like, in the end, and especially for a film like Zoltan Hound of Dracula, which you're probably thinking, I don't know what the hell that is. It's also called Dracula's Dog from, like, 1977. It's an old vampire Dracula film, but it's a dog that's Dracula. It's stupid, but it's cute. Nevertheless, I'm happy to have the release for several reasons, not just because of the transfer and whatever. I mostly got it for the special features, but it's in contrast to the Blu-ray, and again, I like that it comes with the Blu-ray. It's definitely a slightly better picture. There's no benefits of the audio or anything. That hasn't changed. It's just, it's just a bit more maxed out, so you can see things a little bit better. You know, there's a bit more detail on the screen, which is still nicer. You know, as any person who collects physical media would say, that if you can get the clearest, like, I'd say cleanest without it being a Terminator 2 clean, you know, more detail in your image, then that's what you kind of want. But then that also beckons the argument if there's too much grain, because sometimes with a 4K disc you can get a heavier, more noticeable amounts of grain than you would on the Blu-ray. I don't know, one evens it out, probably the Blu-ray does, whereas the 4K shows you all the discrepancies throughout the process, because lo and behold, film is organic. I don't think it's a bad thing if a film doesn't, like a 4K release, doesn't have HDR. I think that they should. Naturally, I think that they should. Because if I want to buy the 4K of a film, I want to, like, if it's an upgrade especially, I want to know that I'm actually getting a benefit. Something with Dr. Caligari, I don't really know why I bought it. I bought it a couple of years ago when it came out. I was like, I got to get that on 4K to look great. But I already had the Blu-ray from Eureka, so I had all the same special features. I had the booklet. In complete reality, I had everything that this goddamn set had to offer, except for maybe a poster and a hard case. So I didn't actually, I think the booklet is like longer in the limited edition version than the standard release. I think the standard release was like a 30-page little pamphlet, whereas the hardcover version comes with like 100 pages. I don't know. But that's like it. There's no real other benefits. You just get like a poster and a couple of 20, 30, 40 extra page books, and then a slightly better looking picture. Like, it's not overly noticeable. They're not doing a new restoration or anything. It's from a pre-existing print. Something, again, like Zoltan, I only got the 4K because it was cheaper at the time to get the 4K than it was to get the Blu-ray. Because I had to get it from Amazon because it's a Kino Lorber. Because in Australia, it's really hard to get Kino Lorber unless you get it from Amazon. So that was just a noticeable thing for me. And I'm like, there are plenty of other films that I have. I don't know which ones they are, unfortunately, that come with like just standard dynamic range. I know that the Blade Runner 2049 4K, its 4K essence, like the HDR grading, is technically a lie. I know that someone had done a whole deep dive into it, and it turned out that they basically didn't apply anything for the HDR grading because Roger Deakins doesn't like HDR. So that's like fine if there's like the artistic intent in mind of like, oh, but also that film really heightens, like, you look at the 4K, the standard release, it's just like HDR grading, it makes it look dynamic and whatever, but that's technically a lie. Like, it still looks better than the Blu-ray does, but at the same time, there's no actual HDR applied to the image, so, you know, it's very, very minimal, if that, because Richard Deakins doesn't like that stuff. So again, artistic intent, fine, but in this case, we're looking at films that wouldn't have artistic intent. I don't know who the hell you'd ask about Zoltan Hannah Dracula. Do they want a 4K with the extra HDR grading? Kino's done a couple of those. I think I got a film called Link, which is another one of their 2019 4K scans, just put onto a 4K disc. There's no extra uptick in detail. It's just because it's a 4K disc that comes with that automatic uptick in detail, but there's no high dynamic range or anything. So they're not putting in the money to do that kind of stuff, to go for it, scene by scene, shot by shot, to put in that extra effort, which you could easily look at from like a critical point of view. You could look at it and say, like, that's kind of cheap of you, Kino, to just give us a 4K disc and not anything else. And that also beckons the argument of, well, it depends on who's buying it. Like, I got Link on 4K and I got Zoltan on 4K because they were, at the time, again, cheaper than the Blu-rays. And that's the only reason I wanted to get them, because they were cheaper. And they still come with the Blu-rays. So it's the same brand in this case for Kino. So they've got that thing of they're just chucking a 4K scanner onto a 4K disc. It looks slightly better. Nice to have it, I guess, if you can get it for a good price. But those are the only arguments I'd have. Like, at least with Dr. Caligari, it's the limited editions version that I got, which came with the larger booklet and poster and other knickknacks, whether you give a shit about that or not. But if you don't care about that kind of stuff and you're just there for the video transfer, then you're basically only benefiting slightly if you didn't have, if you already had the previous 4K restoration on a Blu-ray disc. So, and again, that could depend on the company, because that's just Eureka. I think Kino also did one for Dr. Caligari. I don't think theirs has HDR grading. So it's really up to the consumer. That's kind of as one of those extra loopholes you got to do with the research when you're buying 4K. You got to look into whether or not the HDR that's been applied actually is critically judged well. If they are like, oh, this doesn't come with HDR, but the transfer still looks really nice and it's a slight uptick better, than the Blu-ray. Whenever I go on Blu-ray.com, and if they ever do those kind of cliche reviews where, and I like Blu-ray.com, but you can always tell when there's just not really a lot to say about a 4K scan when they say that, facial details are a bit, crisper, or clothing details stand out a bit more. Just those intimate things where clearly they had to get this close to the fucking TV to actually compare. It's I can see a bit more flakes on that one, and I can see a bit more wrinkles on that person's eye there. So it's that's it. There's no huge uptick in color. There's no deeper blacks or anything. There's none of that shit. So it's always amusing to see those kind of things very clearly on display. So yeah, that's just all I really have to say about that. Because again, whether you like HDR or not, there are 4K releases that just don't come with HDR. And it's worth noting that. And that could be a good thing if you have a 4K TV, but you don't care for HDR. Like, for years I had a 4K TV that only had HDR10, didn't have Dolby Vision or anything, didn't have HDR10 Plus, whatever. And I ended up getting a new TV, but it also is an OLED as well, and it comes with those extra bonuses. Comes with Dolby Vision, comes with Dolby Atmos, comes with HDR10 and HDR10 Plus, and it's an OLED, so it's automatically going to make things look better. It's just worth noting, that kind of stuff. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you care if a 4K release of a film has HDR or non-HDR applied? Do you think it's a bit of a cheat that they will just release 4K films without HDR grading just because they can? Let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.